pro-slavery propaganda called our ancestors stupid, brutish, humble, and obedient to the whip. They said they lacked courage, but slaves revolted in most places. Sometimes, they murdered their masters and overseers. Much more often, they ran away in outlaw communities of escaped slaves called maroon communities and returned to plot revenge. They planned rebellions across America. According to history experts, there are records of around 250 revolts and conspiracies in the history of African American slavery. Some scholars have found as many as 313, and although most slave revolts failed, some shook the system of the New World to its core, and they deserve special attention. Here are the biggest slave rebellions in the African diaspora. Before we get into it, here's a black card. We're going to list 10 rebellions in this video. If you know at least 6 out of 10 of them, you get to keep it. If not, then it gets revoked. Starting at number 10, we have the Slave Rebellion at San Miguel de Gualdape. Gold mines in the Americas were rare, but the notion that this new world was full of riches lasted for years. Kings and queens wanted to fill their treasuries with valuable stones, silver, gold, and all sorts of other materials. But by the early 1520s, gold was getting harder and harder to find. To satisfy the need for cheap labor in the backbreaking search for gold, colonizers enslaved Africans and brought them to San Miguel de Gualdape. This former Spanish colony was founded in 1526. Here's how it all started. In the early 1500s, Spaniards went on expeditions to an area we now call South Carolina and Georgia to capture Native Americans and make them slaves. Elon got official permission from King Charles V to build a settlement on the coast in 1523. Elon got ready to make a new settlement. He had 6 ships, around 600 to 700 people, and animals like pigs, cows, sheep, and 100 horses. On board these ships, there were around 100 enslaved Africans from previous trips. On August 9, 1526, one of the ships hit a sandbar and sank off the coasts of South Carolina. The Indians and the court interpreter deserted the Spaniards. They ran off somewhere in the woods. Elon and his men made a new ship, sailed south, and began making houses and a church. On September 29, 1526, they named the settlement San Miguel de Gualdape, after the local Guale tribe, but the settlers got sick, hungry, and cold, and were attacked by Indians. In just a couple of months, 350 of the 500 settlers were dead. Elon died on October 18, 1526. Captain Francisco Gomez took charge and wanted to wait for more supplies, but a different faction led by Ginés Donsel and Pedro de Bazan wanted to go home. Donsel and his group locked up Gomez and his supporters. Soon after, enslaved Africans set fire to Donsel's home. This created the perfect chance for them to escape. This incident is the first slave rebellion in mainland North America. The Africans went to live with the local Native Americans. The first enslaved Africans known to have been taken to the continent were also the first ones to revolt. They escaped, never to be seen again. By July 1527, only 150 of the original settlers managed to survive and return to Hispaniola. The next one on our list is number 9, the Gaspar Yanga Rebellion. Gaspar Yanga is called the first liberator of the Americas. This young man led the first successful rebellion against slavery in colonial Mexico. He then started one of the earliest communities in America where black people could live freely. There were rumors that Yanga might have come from a royal family in West Africa, but somehow he was captured and forced to work as a slave on sugarcane farms in Veracruz, Mexico. In 1570, Yanga and some followers ran away to the mountains near Cordoba. They made a settlement for former slaves. They lived there for almost 40 years without much trouble from the Spanish rulers. Yanga became their spiritual and military leader. He organized the community so it could grow and live in different places. The economy here relied on agriculture. It was self-sufficient and well protected, but it was important to establish a footing and challenge the colonial system of slavery. At that time, Yanga and his group disrupted and stole trade goods along the Camino Real between Veracruz and Mexico City. They also attacked large estates and kidnapped indigenous women, so they became enemies of the Viceroy of New Spain. In 1609, Spanish authorities sent a strong militia to defeat Yanga and his community, but Yanga won. This unexpected victory boosted his warriors' confidence and morale and frustrated Mexico City. Yanga was victorious yet again in another battle with the Spanish forces. This created the perfect opportunity for Yanga to create lasting results. He suggested peace with 11 conditions. The most important was recognizing his community as free people, official recognition of the settlement as a legal entity with Yanga and his family in charge, and no Spanish people in the community. In return, Yanga would serve the Spanish crown and pay tribute. In 1618, after years of negotiations, the Spanish authorities recognized the town of San Lorenzo de los Negros as a free black settlement. It later became known as Yanga, named after its founder. Next on our list, at number 8, we have another African royal who escaped slavery, but this one took it one step further and created his own kingdom in Brazil. This is the story of the Ganga-Zumba Rebellion. During the 17th century, Ganga-Zumba, also known as Nganga Nzumbi, was the first leader of a vast runaway slave settlement, Quilombo dos Palmares. Experts believe Ganga was Princess Akhwatun's son. She was the daughter of a Congo king. She fought in the Battle of Bwaila, but the Portuguese won. They killed around 5,000 men and took the king, his family, court members, and about 400 other nobles as slaves to sell in the Americas. Ganga-Zumba was also a captive. They were sent to a plantation in Brazil. Zumba, later with his family, managed to escape the Palmares. Their village became a safe place for runaway slaves. Zumba was anointed as a leader and led attacks against the people who enslaved them. Despite the constant threats from the colonial authorities, the village did well. It thrived thanks to its own economy that relied on farming, trading, and communal land. At one point, the escaped slaves had formed 10 separate settlements. These settlements would come together to create the Quilombo dos Palmares. By the 1670s, Zumba had a palace, 3 wives, guards, and a group of followers in his royal compound called Macaco. The place had 1,500 houses for families, guards, and officials. They all were treated like royalty. In the years to come, Zumba and his armies saved other slaves and brought them to Palmares. Together, they continued to fight against Europeans. But in 1677, during a battle, 2 of Zumba's children were captured and 1 was killed. Zumba was hurt in the onslaught and had to agree to a peace deal with the governor of Pernambuco. The peace treaty meant that Zumba's people had to relocate and move close to the colonial government in Cacao Valley. Zumbi, his nephew, didn't like this and took over in 1678. Zumba was poisoned, probably by his own people. After Zumba died, Zumbi became the leader, kept fighting against slavery and the Portuguese. Zumba's followers, who went to Cacao Valley, were caught and returned to a life of slavery. Coming up at number 7, we have the First Maroon War. Many African runaway slaves managed to escape to secluded areas. Large groups of escapees lived and formed communities. These would later be known as maroon communities. Some of these communities had tiny bands that survived for less than a year. Others, however, created powerful states with thousands of members that endured for generations. One of the strongest and most impactful communities is the Jamaican Maroons. Maroons in Jamaica settled in an area called the Cockpit. Here, they were able to create a formidable fortress and a culture that derived from European and African traditions. They used the deep ravines to defend against armies with superior firepower. With every runaway slave that came, their numbers grew more and more. Eventually, the Spanish started to fear their power. The First Maroon War was a series of skirmishes during the 18th century. The Maroon Wars happened because of the many uprisings from 1694 to 1704 and the many slaves who joined their troops. There were minor revolts in 1694, 1702, and 1704 on the north coast of Jamaica. As their numbers grew, it set the stage for the Maroon Wars of 1720 to 1739. Also, the white planters were incredibly aggressive towards the Maroons. These white settlers feared that the Maroons' independence would undermine the property value of their own land. So, they kept provoking them. In response, the Maroons attacked the plantations at night and killed white planters, no matter their age or gender. For white settlers, it was hard to fight the Maroons on their territory. The humidity, daily downpours, and heat proved to be a constant threat to the heavily clothed British soldiers. From 1739 to 1740, the British forces realized they couldn't defeat the Jamaican Maroons. So, they decided to make a deal. The Maroons would stay in their 5 main towns and have their own rules and a British overseer. In exchange, they would stop harboring more runaway slaves and instead help capture them. This created a series of conflicts within the Maroon community itself and the rest of the black population. This set the groundwork for the Second Maroon War. Next on our list, we have number 6 with the Stono Rebellion. The Stono Rebellion was the biggest uprising by enslaved African Americans in colonial America. It happened near the Stono River in South Carolina. We don't have many clear details about the rebellion because only one person's direct account was written down. But some other reports were also made. And remember, these were written by white people who lived there. On September 9th, 1739, 20 enslaved African Americans gathered near the Stono River. They had planned this rebellion, and first, they attacked a place with guns. They killed the owner of the place and took the guns. They marched in St. Paul Parish with signs saying liberty and drums playing. They were going to Florida. We don't know for sure who led them. Some say it was a man named Cato, others say Jemmy. As they went, they killed enslavers and burned houses, but after about 10 miles, a group of white militia found them. The enslaved men were killed in front of other enslaved people. In the end, 21 white people and 44 black people died. This brings us to another slave rebellion at number 5, the slave insurrection at St. John. Life for the enslaved people on the islands was excruciatingly painful. Back in 1733, if a slave stole something important, they would get burned with red-hot tongs 3 times and then hanged. If they tried to escape, they would lose a leg or get 150 lashes and lose an ear. If a European came, they had to move aside, stand still, and show respect. If not, they got a beating. But there was one thing that the Europeans didn't think about. At St. John, there were a lot more slaves than European settlers. 1,087 slaves and 208 settlers to be exact. The punishments were so bad that a rebellion happened on November 23, 1733. The slaves took control of a small Danish fort on a hill. When they fired the fort's cannons, it signaled the other slaves on plantations to rebel. They destroyed about 50 plantations and many sugarcane fields. They also killed several European settlers. Soon, they had control over almost the whole island. The Danish soldiers on St. Thomas were not strong enough to fight the hundreds of rebels. With help from French troops from Martinique, they searched for the rebels and took back their control. By May 1734, the rebellion was stopped. Many rebels died in the battles or chose to commit collective suicide. The military caught 41 rebels alive. 18 of them were killed in one of the most horrific ways you can imagine, all to scare the other slaves. After these violent events, the plantations were put back to work as soon as possible. This brings us to another event. Coming up at number 4, we have the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution was a series of skirmishes from 1791 to 1804. The Haitian slaves fought for their freedom against the colonists, the armies of the French and British, among others. After a lot of fighting, the Haitian people finally gained their independence. They were the first to start their own country after being slaves. In the 1700s, Haiti, which was called Saint Dominique back then, was really important to France. It made more money for France than all 13 North American colonies did for Britain. This was mainly because Haiti grew things like sugar, coffee, indigo, and cotton. They used slaves to get their income. When the French Revolution started in 1789, there were 5 groups in the colony. There were white plantation owners, some smaller business owners, and teachers. They were unhappy with the high taxes and trade rules from France, but they still wanted to keep slavery. Together, these whites were about 40,000. The other 3 groups were people of African descent, those who were free, those who were enslaved, and those who ran away. Around 30,000 free black people lived there, and some were wealthier than smaller white business owners. About 500,000 people were enslaved. Soon, many groups in Haiti started to revolt at the same time. They were inspired by France's Declaration of the Rights of Man. A former slave named Toussaint Louverture led them. On August 21st, 1791, the enslaved people rebelled against the plantation owners. By 1792, they controlled a third of the island. Even though more French and British soldiers came, the rebels kept growing and fighting. They managed to defend against both the French and the British. Toussaint Louverture expanded the revolution to the nearby Spanish colony in 1801. He ended slavery there and became the ruler. Haiti controlled this place until 1844. In 1802, the Haitian Revolution was still going strong, while the French Revolution had ended. Napoleon Bonaparte, the ruler of France, sent his brother-in-law and troops to capture Louverture. They wanted to bring back French rule and slavery. They caught Louverture, and he died in France in 1803. One of Louverture's generals, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was also a former slave, led the fight at the Battle of Versailles. On November 18, 1803, they won against the French. On January 1, 1804, Dessalines declared the nation independent and renamed it Haiti. France was the first to accept its independence. So, Haiti became the first black republic in the world and the second nation in the Americas, after the United States, to become free from a European power. This brings us to number 3 in today's video, and that is the Baptist War. The Baptist War, also called the Sam Sharp Rebellion, was a big uprising in Jamaica. It began on December 25, 1831, and lasted 11 days. Around 60,000 of the 300,000 slaves in Jamaica joined the rebellion. Samuel Sharp, a black Baptist deacon, led it along with his followers. Even though they didn't win, this revolt helped end slavery in the British Empire. During Christmas, the uprising leaders stopped working. They wanted more free time and fair pay. They said they wouldn't work until their owners agreed. The strike turned into a big fight when the owners said no. The rebellion started on December 27, 1831, at Kensington Estate near Montego Bay. They set the sugarcane fields on fire, and white people who weren't in town for Christmas ran away. On December 28th, the Black Regiment defeated a group of local soldiers. The Christmas Rebellion ended in the first week of January 1832. But for 2 more months, the rebels kept fighting in the mountains, using surprise tactics. Next at number 2, we have the Slave Revolt in the Cherokee Nation. The revolt started on November 15, 1842, when a group of 25 black slaves tried to escape to Mexico, where slavery was abolished. The fugitive burglarized stores and took mules, horses, guns, and supplies to get to Mexico. When Cherokee officials heard about it, they sent a search party, but on their way to Mexico, more and more black slaves joined the fugitives. A battle ensued. Some were caught, but the rest escaped. Fearing that their numbers would only get bigger, Cherokee officials wanted to end the revolt fast. After multiple and long battles, the officials caught the group near the Red River. Ultimately, they caught 31 of them and brought them back to Weber's Falls. Some were executed, and the rest were sent back to slavery. The Cherokee Slave Uprising was the biggest rebellion by enslaved people in the Indian Territory, and it was the only one where runaway slaves came from various Indian nations. Finally, we've come to the number 1 event on our list, the Nat Turner's Rebellion. On August 21st, 1831, Nat Turner started one of the bloodiest and most significant rebellions against slavery in Southampton County, Virginia. It went on for 48 hours until white men stopped it. About 60 white people, primarily women and children, were killed. The local authorities caught or killed most of the rebels, but Turner escaped, captured for 2 months. After Turner and his group were stopped, fear spread in the area. Over the next few days, over 100 people believed to be rebels were killed by soldiers, militia, and ordinary people. Virginia's lawmakers talked about ending slavery, but they decided to make rules stricter for enslaved and free African Americans. Do you still have your black card? If so, drop a like and comment down below. The video on the screen shares some more hidden black history they never taught you in school. Click on it now. We'll see you over there.